afternoon. Welcome to the FCCJ. I'm your moderator, Andy Sharp. I work at Nikkei Asia. I'm a first vice president of this club. We have a very special guest today. He actually made his first visit, or he spoke first at the FCCJ back in the 1980s. It's Glenn Fukushima, who most of you will probably know very well. He's a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C. And as many of you also know, he worked here for 22 years as a business executive for several multinational corporations. So anyway, he's back in the US now, working at this think tank. And he's going to talk about the wee matter next week of the US election. I'm sure everyone's aware of the situation. Glenn has said, in recent weeks and months that he thinks that Joe Biden will be a better president for Japan. So we'd like to ask him about that and many other things to do with the US election, his thoughts and views from the ground there, plus what the events will mean for the region of Japan and further beyond. So without any further ado, Glenn is going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then I'll open the floor to questions and also for questions for people watching online. Thank you. Over to you, Glenn.
Well, thank you very much, Andy, for the kind introduction. It's great to be back at the FCCJ. As you mentioned, I lived in Tokyo after leaving USTR in 1990, from 1990 to 2012. And during those 22 years, I was a non-journalist member of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. And so I have many fond memories of visiting there and both speaking there and also hearing some very interesting speakers and having interesting discussions. So it's a real pleasure to be back. Since 2012, I've been at the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C. I want to make it very clear before I speak today that I'm talking today just as an individual, an observer of U.S.-Japan relations and of the U.S. presidential election. I'm not speaking on behalf of any individuals or political parties or institutions or organizations. I'm just speaking based on my own personal observations. I will say that over the last 5 or 6 months, I've been on countless Zoom calls, anywhere from 4 to 10 Zoom calls a day, talking with various candidates running for the White House, the Senate, the House of Representatives, and their advisors. And so I think I have a fairly clear idea of where the two camps stand. I would say that the majority of my discussions have been more on the Democratic side, but when I was at USTR from 85 to 90, it was 4 years of the Reagan administration and 1 year of the George H.W. Bush administration. I was there as a regular government bureaucrat, not as a political appointee, but I still maintain contact with many of my Republican friends. So I think I have some sense of where the two parties stand on the various issues. So based on that, I'd like to talk for about 20 minutes first and divide my comments into 3 parts. First is the context of where we stand now. Secondly is the election itself. And then thirdly, post-election, what we can expect. So part 1, with regard to the presidential election on November 3rd, which is a mere 6 days from today, I would say that compared to the situation in February of this year, we've seen some dramatic and unexpected developments, really quite unexpected. I think there are 4 unexpected developments. The first is that Joe Biden, former Vice President Joe Biden, miraculously had a comeback as a result of the South Carolina primary of February 29th. Until then, as you may recall, he lost in the primaries and caucuses in Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. And many people thought that if he lost in South Carolina, he would have to withdraw from the primaries. However, just a few days before the primary, Congressman James Clyburn, the majority whip in the House of Representatives, a very influential African-American member of Congress, publicly stated his support for Joe Biden. And partly as a consequence, Biden ended up with an overwhelming victory in South Carolina. So he had this kind of miraculous comeback that many people were not expecting. And as a result of that, 5 days later, after the Super Tuesday on March 3rd, and he won most of those primaries. The moderates in the party, the Democratic Party, Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg, Bloomberg, and others rallied to support Biden. And so the first unexpected event was the miraculous comeback of Joe Biden. The second unexpected development was that many people thought that because the Democratic Party was so divided, there were at one point 28 candidates, and mainly divided between the moderates on the one hand and the more progressives on the other, including Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, that the Democratic Party would be so split that even going into the convention, which originally was scheduled for July, later had to be postponed till August, that the convention itself may not be able to produce a clear winner to be the nominee of the party, and it would have to even be a brokered convention, which hadn't happened in several decades. However, by a few days after Super Tuesday, the Democrats coalesced to support Biden. And so that was the second unexpected event. And I think that can largely be explained by the fact that the moderates felt that if they kept fighting with each other, the nominee of the party would end up being Bernie Sanders, and that like in 1972 with George McGovern and 1984 with Walter Mondale, that if the Democrats had a candidate who was too progressive, that they might lose, and we might have another Trump administration. So I think that was one of the reasons that the moderates in the Democratic Party coalesced around Joe Biden. So that was the second major unexpected event. The third unexpected event was the coronavirus and the devastation that it's had, both in terms of public health and the deaths that it's created in the United States, but also how it's damaged the economy. And so this was a third major unexpected event as of February. And then the fourth unexpected event was the May 25th Black Lives Matter whole discussion after the George Floyd incident in Minneapolis. Now, the incident itself of a white police officer killing an African-American man was not that unexpected, because there have been a number of other cases like that. But I think it was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so that elicited a nationwide, in fact, worldwide protest. And so this was also the fourth unexpected events. So if you compare February and now, we have a totally different situation. I think in February, many people, including in the United States, felt that President Trump had a very good chance of being reelected, in part because the economy was doing pretty well, at least the stock market was doing well, unemployment was low. And there were many, I think, at that time who thought that the reelection was probably more than 50-50 possibility. However, as a result of these four unexpected events, we see the situation now where if you look at the public opinion polls, you'll know that depending on the poll, former Vice President Biden leads anywhere between 4 to 11%, with an average of 7.9%, according to Real Clear Politics. But the polls have proven to be unreliable, in part because there are a considerable number of hidden Trump supporters who won't respond to public opinion polls, or if they do respond, they don't necessarily respond accurately. Also, there has been sampling bias, which the pollsters tried to rectify, but still, I think the number of white males with less than college education has in 2016 been underrepresented in the sampling, and there's some question as to whether they're adequately represented in the sampling now as well. And no matter how accurate the polls are, as you know, the turnout is what determines everything. I think in 2008, when Obama was elected, comparing that to 2016, when Trump was reelected, the voter turnout was 1.6% lower in 2016, which led in part to the defeat of Hillary Clinton. And so the voter turnout is very important. And I think that many Democrats believe that the higher the turnout, that the more likely that Biden will win. And as all of you know, it's the Electoral College, not the popular vote, that determines the outcome in the United States presidential election. In 2016, Hillary Clinton got almost 3 million votes more popular votes than candidate Trump. But as a result of 77,000 votes, that is about 11,000 votes in Michigan, about 22,000 votes in Wisconsin, and 45,000 votes in Pennsylvania. Those 77 or 78,000 votes was what led to the 46 electoral votes all going to Trump, and therefore he won the election. And so what's really important is to look at the battleground states or the swing states. And this year, I think most people believe that about 40 of the 50 states, it's reasonably clear whether they're going to vote Republican or Democrat. The remaining states that are being watched very closely are Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Iowa. There's two other states that Democrats are watching very closely, and it's probably not likely, but still possible that they could go blue, that is in favor of Biden, and that's Georgia and Texas. Now, the issues in this election are, there are many, many issues. Domestic policy, there's the coronavirus, there's the economy, healthcare, race relations, the environment, the makeup of the federal courts, abortion, etc. On foreign policy, there's China, there's North Korea, there's Iran, the Middle East, Russia, NATO, immigration. However, fundamentally, this election comes down to a referendum on Donald Trump and his presidency, both in terms of his character and his fitness as president, and also on his achievements. So that's the context of where we are now. Let me switch to the election itself, because this election is unlike any other election we've seen, at least in the post-war period for the United States, for two reasons. The first reason is the coronavirus, and this has led to a large number of people, especially Democrats, voting by mail. And so this presents a new set of circumstances. The second factor that's unusual in this election is that President Trump has said on several occasions when he's been asked, will you accept the result of the election? He's answered, well, if I win, I will certainly accept, but if I don't win, it has to be because there's been something wrong. And it's because of some irregularity. That's the only way in which I could lose. And therefore, when he's been asked, are you going to accept a peaceful transition of power if you were to lose, he has not agreed to that. And so on this score as well, it's a somewhat unusual election. And there have been all kinds of scenarios that are being painted about what might happen if there is not a clear, overwhelming victory by Vice President Biden. So one issue with regard to the election is the voting method. I think the president has repeatedly expressed suspicion about mail voting, saying that there's a lot of irregularities, fake voting, and you can't rely on the mail ballots. And therefore, he's casting doubts on the legitimacy and the accuracy of mail voting. The Democrats in particular, because of coronavirus, have been very intent on absentee voting and mail voting. And so most of the public opinion polls show that the Democrats are overwhelmingly going to vote by mail as compared to the Republicans, who are being encouraged by the president to actually go in person to the polling places on November 3rd to do the balloting of the voting. Another question has to do with the timing of the announcing of the results, because of the fact that there's going to be so many ballots by mail, and depending on the state, as you know, because the US is a federal system, and each state has its own regulations and laws and rules regarding registering the vote and also registering to vote, as well as the conditions under which one votes. And therefore, there are some states that allow for the counting of the mail ballots before the election. And then there are some that require that the counting be done only on the election day and later. And also until when the ballots can be received in order to be valid. Those are all depending on the state. So there have been dozens of lawsuits between Republicans and Democrats to try to clarify and to set the ground rules that would be in favor of Republicans or Democrats. And even just recently, there's been cases involving North Carolina, Wisconsin, Florida, Pennsylvania that have ruled the courts have ruled in favor of what one party or the other has requested. Now, if there's an overwhelming victory, either by Trump or by Biden, we can expect that the results will be known on the 3rd or 4th of November. On the other hand, if there's only a slight difference, it could take 3 or 4 days, it could take a week, and some people think it even could take several weeks for the final results to be known. Now, President Trump, on a number of occasions, has said that he thought that the results could be decided by the Supreme Court, and he's thinking back to the Gore versus Bush election of 2000, where, as you may recall, in Florida, there was a dispute over the counting of the ballots, and it took about a month for the final results to be known. The Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, had to intervene to rule that the recounting should be stopped. And as a result, then Texas Governor Bush won that election with fewer than 600 votes more than Vice President Gore, although Gore, on a nationwide basis, had something like 540,000 more popular votes than Governor Bush. So that is a very extraordinary situation. It's quite unlikely that it'll go to the Supreme Court, but there's another wrinkle in all this, something that is provided for in Amendment 12 of the US Constitution. If one candidate does not have the requisite number of electoral votes, that is 270 electoral votes, by January, then it goes to the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives decides on the president. But the House of Representatives, each state is represented by one person. And that person is determined by who has the majority in the state delegation. So right now it's 26 Republicans, 22 states that have a majority Republican, 22 states that have a majority Democrat, and then 2 are tied. And so, but based on the results of this election for the House of Representatives, also on November 3rd, the makeup of the House could also change. And so, so actually there's 3 different ways it is conceivable that the outcome could be known. Number one is the election itself, and assuming that one of the candidates gets the 270 electoral votes necessary. If not, then perhaps the House of Representatives. If not, then maybe the Supreme Court. Now, these latter 2 are unlikely, but still within the realm of possibility. So it's very complicated. Then another issue is, will the results be accepted? As I mentioned, President Trump has said repeatedly that if he loses, that he will not accept the results. And therefore, there has been some concern, some speculation that perhaps there will have to be some way to have the president leave office if he were to lose and insist on not leaving. So that is something that has not been seen, at least in the post-war period. Now, again, if there's an overwhelming victory by one side or the other, these issues will not come up. But if it's not a large gap between the 2, we could see this kind of controversy. So from the, I think, Republican point of view, and especially President Trump, he's casting a lot of doubts on the legitimacy of mail balloting. And therefore, if he were to lose, then I'm sure that he will claim that these mail ballots, some of them are invalid, and therefore there should be a recount, or there should be something done to undo that problem. From the Democrats' point of view, the message has been to get out the vote, that the higher the voter turnout, the more likely it is that Biden will win. It is true that there are a number of cases, especially in the South, where Republicans have been trying to engage in voter suppression, making it difficult for voters to register, that is, imposing all kinds of requirements to register to vote, and also limiting the number of polling places, et cetera. So, there have been some cases, like in Texas, where people have had to line up for 12 hours to vote because of the limitation on the number of polling places. So in any case, assuming that sometime after November 3rd, a clear victor is announced, then on the transition will take place. This is a 2.5-month period between November 4th and January 20th. January 20th of next year is the inauguration. So if that goes smoothly, then inauguration on the 20th of January of next year. Let me switch in the final part 3 to what's going to happen after the election. Scenario 1, Donald Trump is reelected. In that case, I think we can assume that he will continue in his policies in the first term of making America great again. And also in terms of domestic policy, some of his major priorities in the first term have included, number 1, cutting taxes for corporations and the wealthy. Number 2, deregulation of companies, especially in the energy, environment, and financial services. Number 3, restricting immigration. Number 4, repealing Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, the healthcare insurance that was passed during the Obama administration. And number 5, appointing conservative justices to the judges to the federal judiciary. As you know, in the United States, in addition to the Supreme Court, there are 13 circuit courts of appeal and 94 federal district courts. And these have tremendous authority and power. And therefore, part of the reason that there was this huge controversy over the last month or so as a result of the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice, and the fact that the Republicans, with only a few weeks before the election, basically engineered the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett to succeed her as the 9th Justice of the Supreme Court. On foreign policy, what I mentioned up to now is domestic policy. On foreign policy, I think that we can expect that President Trump would continue with the America First approach, which would focus and emphasize bilateral rather than multilateral agreements, arrangements with other countries. I think that we'll see more withdrawing of the United States from international agreements and organizations. He has already withdrawn, as you know, from the Paris Climate Accord, from the TPP, from the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, and the World Health Organization. I think many people believe that if there's a second Trump administration, he's likely to withdraw from the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and even from NATO in Europe. Also on trade, I think he will continue his focus on bilateral trade deficits and trying to reduce the deficits with countries like China and Japan and Germany. And he will continue with the free, fair, and reciprocal trade agreements. I think that in the second term, he will focus more than on the first term on the national security issues, in particular, trying to reduce the burden on the United States of defending our allies. All through the last 30 years, Donald Trump has been quite fixated on trying to reduce free riders. And as you well know, with the withdrawal of 1/4 of US military from Germany and the ongoing negotiations and host nation support with South Korea and with Japan, if those negotiations don't end up in a satisfactory conclusion, I think it's quite likely that the Trump administration would withdraw some troops from East Asia. So those are what I expect would happen in a second Trump administration. Scenario number 2, if Joe Biden were elected, Biden, as you know, his slogan, as opposed to Make America Great Again, is we're in a battle for the soul of America. And what he means by that is I think he believes that there's a certain soul of America that has been ignored by President Trump, and that President Trump is taking the United States in a different and wrong direction. And Vice President Biden, if elected president, would like to restore and go back to what he thinks is America with the soul of America. One of the slogans also that he's used is Build Back Better. This is based on a speech he made in Dunmore, Pennsylvania on July 9th, 2020. And this is a very comprehensive economic plan to revive America. So I think that if there is a Biden administration, there will be 5 priorities. Priority number 1 is controlling the coronavirus. And as you know, yesterday in the United States, Mark Meadows, the president's chief of staff, said on a television interview program, we're not going to control the coronavirus. So there seems to be almost a admission that it's not going to be possible to control the coronavirus. So as opposed to that, I think Vice President Biden very much wants to make controlling the coronavirus to be the top priority. His view is that that's kind of the basics, and in addition, there's going to be two major differences, I think, with the Trump administration. One is that the Biden plan would be a national plan, a federal plan, not leaving things up to the states. And the second will be there's going to be international cooperation. I think Biden plans to rejoin the U.S. to rejoin the WHO, and also to work with other countries to try to control the coronavirus and to develop a vaccine. So that's priority number one. Priority number two is reviving the U.S. economy through the Build Back Better. And this is a really comprehensive program of vast infrastructure investment, by investment in education, research and development, climate change, which in many ways, as Joe Biden has said, he said something like, when you say climate change, President Trump thinks it's a hoax. I think of jobs. And I think that Vice President Biden thinks the climate change agenda will result not only in trying to better the environment, but also to create jobs, high-paying jobs for Americans. Priority number three would be addressing the economic inequalities and the social injustice, economic injustice, criminal injustice represented by Black Lives Matter. And so this, I think, will be a major and a third area of priority. Number four is climate change. I think that Vice President Biden and his advisors believe that this is an existential threat to the United States and the world, and that during the Trump administration, not only has the Trump administration ignored and neglected the problems, they've actually made things worse by loosening regulations on polluters, for instance, and not providing incentives for non-fossil fuel energy development. So that'll be a fourth priority. And the fifth priority is restoring America's role in the world, global engagement and alliances. Vice President Biden said in a town hall meeting several months ago, actually, he said, when I become president, on the first day on my job, I'm going to pick up the telephone and call the leaders of all of our allies and tell them America is back. America is back. We're going to be globally engaged again. So I think that this is going to be a fifth area of focus, and exerting American leadership, but in a way that will, according to his advisors, be in a kind of a modest and humble way, and also to work with our allies and our partners, and also to put some emphasis, as has not been done by the Trump administration, on human rights and democracy. With regard to U.S., so those are I think the priorities of a Biden administration. With regard to U.S.-Japan relations, under a Trump administration, I don't think there will be significant changes on the economic side. On the defense side, as I mentioned before, I think there will be much more of an emphasis on security and reducing the free rider status as Trump sees it, because as you know, Trump has been telling our NATO partners, you should spend at least 2% of your GDP on defense. Sometimes he said 4%. Japan only spends less than 1%, as you know. So I'm sure that this is going to be an issue that President Trump will want to focus on, as well as host nation support. If there's a Biden administration, I don't expect that there's going to be that much focus on host nation support. I think there will be a desire on the Biden administration to work with Japan bilaterally, but also multilaterally on various issues, whether it's climate change or pandemics or working together on North Korea, working together on China. So there will be an attempt to cooperate and work with Japan as an ally and a partner. And I think that with regard to China policy, I know there's a lot of concern in Japan about what a Biden administration would mean in terms of China policy. I'd be happy to talk about that during the question and answer session. But I think fundamentally, the Biden camp's view is that China is a competitor and a rival, but it's not the enemy. And therefore, we will have confrontation, we will have competition, we'll have frictions on a whole range of issues, whether it's national security, human rights, economics. However, if there are areas in which we can cooperate and the US can benefit from that, we should, on global issues, including pandemics, including climate change, including nuclear non-proliferation, and also to work with our allies with regard to China. So I'm running out of time, so let me just conclude by saying I'm not going to predict an outcome because in 2016 I made a mistake in predicting the outcome. But two things I would point out, which are also very important in addition to the outcome of the presidential election. Number one is how the Senate vote goes. That is right now it's 53 to 47 Republican majority in the US Senate. If this continues, and if Biden is elected president, I think President Biden would still have difficulty getting his agenda through if there is an uncooperative majority in the Senate. So, on the other hand, if the Senate goes majority Democratic, which many observers believe is possible, then I think Biden will be able to get a lot of legislation through and also get his people that he nominates to be confirmed by the Senate. Because, as you know, in a new administration in Washington, 4,000 new people come in to lead the senior positions. Of them, 1,200 require Senate confirmation. So the secretaries, deputy secretaries, undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, and ambassadors all require Senate confirmation. And if the Senate is majority Democratic, President Biden would have an easier time getting his people through. On the other hand, if it's a President Trump and the Senate goes Democratic, he will have a more difficult time than he has now. So that's one thing to watch. A second thing to watch is that in a Trump administration, I think we will see in the second term, as we saw in the first, that President Trump believes that I'm the only one that counts. I alone can fix it. Therefore, it doesn't matter that much who the Secretary of State is or NSC. The NSC advisor, we've had 4 NSC, about one per year. In a Biden administration, I think that he would choose some very capable and experienced people for senior positions like the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Treasury, U.S. Trade Representative. And I think that the Biden administration would delegate more to these cabinet secretary level people. So I think who assumes these positions, who becomes a Secretary of State, who becomes Secretary of Treasury, who becomes Secretary of Commerce, who becomes the head of who becomes U.S. Trade Representative, that will be very important, more important in a Biden administration than in a Trump administration. So those are two things, the Senate vote outcome, election outcome, and who assumes which positions. I think fundamentally, I would conclude by saying that the alliance between the US and Japan, Japan being a close alliance partner of the United States, will continue. And I don't anticipate there's going to be any major huge issues that would disrupt the relationship, with the exception of this issue of host nation support. And I think there's going to be a need for the US and Japan to engage in much more intensive bilateral, but also discussions bilaterally about multilateral issues, because I think a Biden administration would hope to work with Japan on multilateral issues and cooperate with Japan on these issues. So I'm sorry I went on longer than I expected, but I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Certainly American democracy is a very complex thing that many of us struggle to get our heads around, but it's infinitely fascinating anyway. So anyway, I bring you to the first question. A question here by email, and if anyone in the room has a question as well, I'm happy to take that. I've got a few questions coming online. The first one is from Jesse Johnson at the Japan Times. He's asking, how much will the need to focus intensely on domestic issues mean Washington's eyes are drawn away from Asia? And is this kind of scenario, I guess under Trump or Biden, buy Japan some time to run out the clock and formulate a robust response, especially when it comes to contentious bilateral trade and burden sharing issues?
I think if there's a Trump administration, it will probably take some time to come up with a clear Japan policy. And we certainly saw that in 2016 and 17. And I think it gave Japan and the Abe government, cabinet, time to take the initiative and to propose various things, including the Aso-Pence economic dialogue that went nowhere. if there's a Biden administration, I think that many of the people around Biden are people who've had quite a bit of experience working with Japan during the Obama administration. But I think that well, first of all, I think the Biden administration will be focused on the domestic issues, and with regard to foreign policy, I think that China will be probably the highest challenge in terms of foreign policy. But I think in terms of our alliances and partners, I think many people around Biden, and Biden probably himself, believe that our relationship with our European partners have been really frayed. The relationship with Germany and France in particular, to some extent with the UK, and that needs a lot of attention as well. So I don't want to say that either administration will not pay attention to Japan, but I think in part because it's perceived that there aren't a lot of problems between the U.S. and Japan, that I don't anticipate that a lot of attention is going to be given to Japan, at least in the first, say, 100 days of either administration. But I don't think that should be seen as a negative thing. In fact, I think that will give the opportunity for Japan to come up with some ideas and some proposals and some initiatives, whether it's a Trump administration or a Biden administration, to maintain and strengthen the U.S.-Japan relationship.
Okay, thank you. Got another question here from online from Rocky Swift at Reuters. He's asking, it's following up from what you just said. He's asking who you think might be in line for positions in a Biden cabinet, state, defense, treasury, commerce, etc. And can you comment also on what kind of Japan-centric or Asian-centric policies that these individuals may bring?
Well, it's difficult for even the most professional Washington watchers to predict who would be in a Biden administration, in part because Joe Biden became senator at the age of 29. He was senator for 36 years, 6 terms, and vice president for 8 years. So 46 years in Washington. And he was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So he has had so much experience in Washington that he just knows so many people. He knows so many people who used to work on his staff, people who used to be members of Congress, in the Senate, in the House, people who used to be in the administration. So he has this huge group of people that he could choose from. So from that point of view, I think that if you talk to experts in Washington and look at the kind of the trade press and so forth, you'll see, maybe 3 to 5 names for some of the senior positions. But it's very difficult to know who will end up being in which position. Also, I mean, some of the people are people who are well known who were in the Obama administration, but I think it's one of the things that's also going to be interesting to watch is to what extent he brings on people who he knows well and worked with during the Obama administration on the one hand, versus those who are newcomers, people, especially from the private sector, people who have new, fresh ideas, not necessarily longtime Washington people. Also, I think because of Joe Biden's age, the people he knows tend to be in their 60s and above, whereas I think among Democrats, there's a desire to have a younger generation work in the government. The other factor that I think we need to consider is that Biden himself, as well as others, have said that unlike the Trump administration, a Biden administration ought to look like America. And therefore, I think there's going to be a real emphasis placed on diversity. I wouldn't be surprised if half the cabinet members will be women, and I'm sure that there's going to be African Americans, some Latinos, maybe some Asian Americans. So I think that from that point of view too, it's quite difficult to predict. Most of the names that have been mentioned are people who are familiar names from the Obama administration, but I doubt that all of those people are going to work in the government for those reasons that I mentioned, wanting to get a younger group, wanting to get people from outside of Washington, as well as having more diversity. Was there another part to that question other than the makeup of the cabinet?
Well, he was asking what kind of policies these individuals may bring, but I guess that given that...
I would just say one thing, which is that On Japan, I think the view is that Japan is a close and valuable partner and ally, and we need to work with Japan in order to be more effective. For the US to be more effective in Asia, we need to work with Japan and South Korea and Australia and maybe India, and that we should work closely with our like-minded partners, especially because of North Korea and China. So I think that there will be a emphasis on trying to engage with Japan and to work together with Japan, both on a bilateral as well as a multilateral basis.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the floor? No? Okay, we'll go to our next question online. This is from David McNeil at the Irish Times. There's two questions, and they're both very different questions. So maybe I'll just ask the first one first and then come to the second one. So his first question is about Biden's stance on China. Will he, for example, face down Beijing over Taiwan and its treatment of the Uyghur minority? You know, issues that Trump has not touched upon so much. I mean, basically, yeah, how do you see Biden's take on China? Is it going to be Trump light or closer to the original sort of Obama approach to more collegiate, more working together kind of stance that Obama had to China?
Well, this is a question that has been raised many times in the US as well. And I think the answer is that a Biden administration will not revert to the Obama administration in terms of China policy. The view in the United States about China has changed dramatically over the last, I'd say, 6 years or so, even before the Trump administration came into office, although he's kind of accelerated things with all the trade wars and so forth. Even before that, the view of China in the United States, and this is a bipartisan, it's Democrats as well as Republicans, but I think the business community view of China has changed to become much more realistic and critical. Certainly the academic perspective on China has become much more realistic. The NGO, NPO perspective has become tougher. And the political world has also, for a whole variety of reasons. And I've read like 25 or 30 reports that have come out over the last few years by academic groups, by think tanks, by congressional committees, business groups about China. And if you look at the Pew Research polls about American perception of China, it's very clear that the perception of China has grown very negative in the United States. So I don't think there's any way that the Biden administration will revert to the early part of the Obama administration, when there was still some optimism that with increased trade, investment, with more student exchanges, that China was going to open up, become more liberal, more a freer economy, and eventually politically more tolerant. But so I think that view is no longer in operation in the United States with regard to China. So that environment is such that no matter who becomes Secretary of State or U.S. Trade Representative, I think that in fact, I would say that probably the senior official in the Trump administration who has been, say, most supported by Democrats is Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative, because the view is that there may be criticisms about the methods by which the Trump administration has approached China, but identifying the problems is something that I think many Democrats agree with. And so I don't think that there's going to be a kind of a soft approach to China. But the difference with the it's not going to be going back to Obama, but it's also not going to be following Trump. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned before, one of the central tenets is that China is a competitor and a rival, but not the enemy. And therefore, so that's one thing. And so where it's possible to cooperate, where it's in the benefit of the US, as climate change, as in pandemics, as in nuclear non-proliferation, these are areas where the US should work with China to the extent that China is willing to work with the United States. Also, I think the Biden administration will want to work with our allies and partners and not approach China on its own, only by itself. So I think that from that perspective, there will be a difference. So it's not going to be either reverting to Obama or following Trump. It's going to be something in between, which I think the Biden people believe is a more realistic and practical and effective way to deal with China. And also, as you mentioned, I think the focus on human rights, certainly Hong Kong, Taiwan, the Uyghur situation, I think those will be much more focused on by a Biden administration. I mean, we see from John Bolton's book and other places that President Trump has actually endorsed Xi Jinping's treatment of the Uyghurs, and Trump really hasn't done very much with regard to Hong Kong as well. So I think there will be a real difference there on human rights with the Biden administration.
And more
one other thing I should mention, sorry, is that another central tenet, I think, of the Biden people is that we can only be more competitive internationally if we're stronger domestically. And stronger domestically obviously means reviving the economy and also making the investment in infrastructure and education and R&D. And it's one thing for the Trump administration to say, well, don't buy 5G, don't buy Huawei, but then does the U.S. have an alternative? I think the Biden people believe that we can't be more competitive, we can't be more persuasive in the world unless the U.S. itself is more competitive economically and more democratic politically and economically. So that's another difference I think we will see in a Biden administration.
So under Biden, would there be more decoupling of the economies?
I don't think that a Biden group would think administration would term it as decoupling. I think the view would be that there are certain strategic industries in which the U.S. has to reduce our dependence on China. And those are industries where the United States, either on its own or with like-minded partners, should develop. So we should reduce our dependence on China for crucial strategic industries. However, I don't think there's a notion that we should decouple with China, because there are benefits to both countries of engaging in trade and investment. But it is those strategic industries where we need to be very careful and very selective with regard to trade and investment.
Okay, thank you. And a second question here from David. It's more domestic, I guess. In the event that Trump loses, do you take seriously the prospect of voter fraud, claims of voter fraud, and possible mass civil disturbances in the US should Trump not concede?
So, as I mentioned, if there's a clear outcome, for instance, if Biden wins overwhelmingly, both in terms of the popular vote and the electoral vote, then I think the probability of problems arising are minimized. Because I think that even if Trump himself opposes the election results and claims fraud and so forth, I don't think that the Republican Party would go along with him. A few may, but I think if there's an overwhelming victory, then I think the nation, including Republicans, would say, look, this is the outcome, and based on the rules of democracy, you should concede and leave office. The problem is that if there is a close election result, and if it takes time to know the outcome, then it opens up the possibility that Trump himself, and especially people who are supportive of him, you've read about the case of the 13 men who were planning to kidnap the governor of Michigan. I mean, those nationalistic, some would say white supremacist, white power organizations. I've been reading some books recently about the history of these groups, which, in the 1980s, they really have been growing in numbers. And I think that the Trump administration has, in some sense, encouraged more open activity by these groups. And so, I would certainly not rule out the possibility of some kind of, protest by these people. But I think, so that's why I think if there's an overwhelming victory by Biden, that possibility is vastly minimized. if it's a close election and some people actually support Trump in his claim that there was some voter fraud, mail balloting was illegitimate, and if it takes time, then that kind of protest could develop. And the other factor that I'm personally concerned about is that it opens up the possibility for further foreign intervention. And everyone knows that in 2016, the Russians intervened and tilted the outcome to favor President Trump, although President Trump and most Republicans will deny that. 17 American intelligence agencies confirmed that. And therefore, if there is time between the election and the results being known, and if there is not a big difference, then that leaves open the possibility of kind of domestic protests and dissidents, as well as foreign intervention that may try to foment and exacerbate those differences and divisions in the United States. So that is a real concern I have. But I think if there's a clear outcome, I think those will, I wouldn't say they'll go to zero, but I think the possibility would be vastly minimized.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Anything from the floor? Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Glenn. Obviously, these things are impossible to predict accurately, but on the morning of November the 4th in Washington, or maybe a week or so later once the postal votes are counted, who do you think will win and by what kind of margin in the Electoral College?
So, as I mentioned at the end of my talk, I'm not prepared to make predictions because I was so wrong in 2016 when in fact, about 2 weeks before the election of 2016, I was in Tokyo and I was invited to appear on Nichio Toro, the NHK Sunday morning program, with former ambassador to the US, Fujisaki, with Professor Soe of Keio University and Professor Kubo of Tokyo University, all three considered to be experts on the United States. And the four of us all predicted that Hillary Clinton would win. And so I remember the New York Times that morning of November 8th predicted that Hillary Clinton's probability of winning was 85%. Princeton Consortium, which had a very good track record of predicting election results, I think a week before the election predicted 93% probability. So if you look at the public opinion polls now, the advantage that Biden has over Trump is roughly the same or a little bit better than what Clinton had, but the numbers are much more stable. And that leads Democrats to be more hopeful that these are accurate reflections of the voting outcome. However, at the same time, voter turnout is so critical. And if the African American vote, the Latino vote, the Asian American vote, the women voting, the youth vote, if these five categories, if the voter turnout is lower than expected, then Biden could lose. So I think voter turnout is really key. And as recently as this morning, there was a New York Times discussion between two of the columnists, and neither was willing to really commit. Everybody is, saying, well, the numbers look good for Biden, but there's still a week left. No one can predict what's going to happen in a week. I mean, October surprises, there have been, probably 10 different surprises up to now, but there could be some other surprises. So these, unexpected events could happen. Voter turnout could be higher or lower than expected. And so, on the one hand, some people are predicting a landslide, overwhelming victory by Biden. Others are expecting that actually Trump will be able to claw back and be able to squeak through with a win, like last time, where he lost the popular vote, but he won the electoral vote. And there's some political scientists who say that in 2016, Trump lost almost by 3 million votes on the popular vote, but some analysts are saying Biden could win 5 million votes more on the popular vote and still lose in the Electoral College, because the gap between the Electoral College and the popular vote is grown so much. So I'm not prepared to make a prediction. All I would say is that all the many professionals who've been watching this for years and years and years, they are really split. You know, they think it could be a real blue wave, massive blue wave. Biden wins big with the not only popular vote, but Electoral College. The Senate goes to the Democrats, and in the House could gain anywhere from 5 to 15 seats for the Democrats. So there's that optimistic, rosy scenario. On the other hand, there's a scenario that says the House will stay Democratic because they have a huge margin, the Democrats. The Senate may not go Democrat. I mean, the majority of analysts believe the Senate will become majority Democrat because the Democrats only need 3 seats net to be even, 50-50. And if they get the White House, then the vice president breaks the tie vote. So I think that the majority of observers believe that the Senate will go majority Democratic, but there's still the possibility that the Republicans will be able to maintain the Senate majority. And with regard to the White House, it really is unpredictable. Even the most sophisticated pollsters and analysts leave room for the possibility of Trump winning, not by a large margin. I don't think many people believe that Trump could win by a large margin, and he lost by 3 million popular votes last time. So he probably won't get a popular vote majority, but he could squeak through by maintaining those Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and some of the Rust Belt and the southern states. On the other hand, as I say, some of the really optimistic Democrats believe that Georgia or Texas even may go into the Biden camp, and which would be a landslide. So this is one of those elections where people are very reluctant to make a prediction, and I'm one of those.
Sure. And you mentioned some of the states there. So obviously Georgia and Texas are long shots for Democrats. But which of the 10 or so states you mentioned, which 1 or 2 would you say we should be focusing on as journalists in trying to work out what are the key states? Is it Pennsylvania, Iowa, Wisconsin? I don't know.
Well, I think that Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania are also all very important because Trump won them by such small margins last time. But if you think about the timing and the fact that the East Coast time zone, that will be where the vote count should be earlier. I think that certainly Florida, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, I think those 3 states, if you watch the outcome there, and if Biden wins those 3, I think Biden's going to win. Yesterday, the deputy campaign manager for Biden and a very close advisor to Trump were on a Sunday morning news program, and they were both asked this question. Actually, they were asked the question, which state do you think is the most crucial that we should be watching, we journalists should be watching? The Biden person wouldn't name one state, but the Florida, because she said that, so many important states, I don't want to name one, but the Trump person said Florida. He said Florida is the bellwether state, and Trump is going to win Florida, and that means that Trump is going to win the election. Florida is crucial because it has a lot of electoral votes, but also, because the Cuban Americans there constitute a significant portion of Latinos, the Trump support is stronger there than it is in a place like Texas, which has more Mexican Americans rather than Cuban Americans. So Florida, I think, really is crucial, but also North Carolina and Pennsylvania. So those 3 states, I think I would watch very closely because they're the early states on the East Coast, and how if they all go Biden, I think that means Biden will win.
Okay, and on that note, I think we'll bring this news conference to an end. Thank you very much, Glenn. Appreciate your time. We
Thank you.
have here, I know you were previously a member of the club, but we have here an honorary year's membership, which we
Thank
will
you.
send by post to you. So
Thank
who knows when this will arrive?
Yes, well, I look forward to going to the club and seeing old friends. So thank you very much for the invitation. I look forward to it.
Thanks very much indeed. And hope we can have a discussion post-election about what this all means. That would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Great. Thank you. Goodbye.